What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and in this video we are going to do an update on the best in the West. This will be a combined rankings of the LEC and the LCS. First, I'm going to rank 6 of the teams from the LCS. Then I'm going to rank all of the teams from the LEC, and then I'm going to put the LCS teams back in at the end. I made a LCS rankings video separately. If you want to get more information on all those teams, you should go check it out there. So with no further ado, let's just get into it. So to begin, the disclaimer that I haven't used recently, I understand these are all professional players, but when we're analyzing professional players, you need to analyze them relative to one another. So I don't think that these players are bad, or that they're bad people, or that they deserve to be harassed or flamed. It's just, there's a certain way to talk about these kinds of things where you might use some like inflammatory language, but you're not like trying to say something negative about the person themselves. So starting off in the F tier, this is the no future tier. There is nothing about this team that I really like. Some of the players might be okay, and I might be okay with some of the players, but they're fundamentally flawed in some way, the team. And with Immortals, the fundamental flaw is that they've decided to build around revenge. So if that is your guiding star, your guiding principle, you're doomed. Next up, CLG. I think that they need multiple roster changes, and that's what the D tier is going to be. That's going to be like the main criteria. If I think a team needs multiple roster changes in order to be competitive for playoff spots. I think that theoretically CLG could make playoffs with this current roster, but I don't think long term it gives them enough upside to justify keeping it together for the summer split. Then we have Golden Guardians, FlyQuest, TSM, and Dignitas. I think that, and it is in that order roughly, I think that all of these teams have some redeeming qualities about them. So either like talent or good play style or good team cohesion, or has had very high highs during the split. I just don't think that they are going to be strong enough given the divide I think that there is between the top 4 teams and the rest of the league. And we'll get into that more in detail later. So for the LEC, we're going to go from the bottom to the top. Every time I think of that, I say that, I think of that song, and you know exactly what song I'm thinking about. So first up, let's talk about Astralis. So Astralis has already decided to move away from their top laner and their support. So at best they could be in the D tier, meaning need multiple roster changes. I think that Zenzara needs to be taken out as well. So because I don't know what the changes are going to be, I think that they kind of need to stay in F tier. It means it's more likely for them to end up in something like the B tier or the C tier, because if they go out and they make the right roster moves by getting a much better top laner, well, actually, I don't think White Knight was a problem. If they get a very good support and then swap out the jungle, I think that they could be onto something. But I don't really trust in them at all for summer specifically, and it's tough to kind of talk about their future when they don't have a full roster right now. At least I don't know what their full roster is. Next up, we have Team BDS. So we have Adam, Syncroft, Nuclear Int, Xmatty, and Limit. I don't know if they're going to make other changes. I think that Limit is an okay player. He has shown that he can be a playmaking difference maker in the playoffs. It's just, he can't do it all. Xmatty, I don't have much faith in Xmatty long-term as an AD carry. Nuclear Int had some bright spots, but overall wasn't very impressive. Syncroft is an older jungler, and that might be something that I talk about multiple times throughout this video. If you are not a difference maker, and you are not definitely going to be a long-term solution for a team, I think they should get rid of you. And again, I don't mean that negatively towards Syncroft in particular. That's a criticism I have of a lot of players. You're better off getting rid of it, trying something new. If that person doesn't work, just keep doing it until you find players that have some quality about them that you want to hold on to long term. And then you have Adam. Adam, on all accounts, is kind of just a toxic guy. But he is good at League of Legends. So, what are you going to do with a team like that? I think that I do think that Limit is fine. Nuclear in, I'm on the fence. Maddie Syncroft, I'm probably a no, and then Adam, I think, should definitely stick around. He's talented enough. He has some maturing he needs to do. So I would say, this needs multiple roster changes, and I do think that they're better than Astralis in general, and they're definitely better than Immortals, and so is Astralis. Even with 3 players, they're better than Immortals. Next up is SK Gaming. So Genax name changed to JNX, which is, I guess, kind of cool. They have Gilius in the jungle, Certus in the mid lane, Jezu and Treats. I think that they are a quintessential league average team. Like, their best case scenario is ending up like 4th or 5th place, and their worst case scenario is ending up 8th or 9th. And it can fluctuate wildly based on just like random games. I think that Genax is an okay top laner. I think that White Knight is probably a better top laner than him, or at least very similar. Gilius, we've seen Gilius's peak. I think it's time for them to move on from Gilius because, what has to happen in the summer playoffs for Gilius's veteran status to be a benefit for SK Gaming? Do they think they're going to make a run in the playoffs? I don't think so, and I would be surprised if they actually thought that. Certus, maybe he can stick around long term. I'm not convinced yet. Jezu, not a big fan. Treats, league average at best. He talks about the game well, and sometimes he kind of seems like he understands the game at a very deep level. But that doesn't mean you're a professional support. So, SK Gaming, I think they need multiple roster changes as well for me to be excited about their long-term future. I don't really see a huge difference between these teams. Next up, Mad Lions. So Mad Lions were very overrated going into the year by a lot of people, which is understandable because there are a lot of people out there who think that Elyoya is one of the best junglers in the West. I have never felt that way. He is he's in the upper end of LEC junglers, but he is not in the upper echelon internationally. I'll get into that in a separate video, I guess, but my main, not criticism of Elyoya, but criticism of the praise of Elyoya is that when he came into the scene, he was in the carry jungle meta, and he was a carry jungle player, and that's fine. You can win games and deserve some credit for it, but he's just been getting too much credit. People are going to want to blame the failure of this split on Reeker and Unforgiven specifically. Armut didn't really play that well in a lot of their losses. Kaiser has always been someone that I think he just comes off as like the stereotypical listens to other people give their opinions on stuff and then kind of regurgitates it. I think in a lot of his interviews, he knows what to say, but he doesn't necessarily know why he's saying it. That's a personal thing that I just kind of feel based off of what I've seen in his interviews. So what's the limit for a team like Mad Lions? I think they do need multiple roster changes in order for them to be competitive to win the title. But if you told me, they made it to the quarterfinals with this roster next year, I wouldn't be totally shocked. Or quarterfinals. Yeah, quarterfinals. Yeah, if they make it to quarters, they could win, 1 or 2 matches. I'm assuming it's like the same kind of double elimination bracket. Definitely possible. Really what needs to happen is the meta needs to shift towards utility AD carries, and maybe that's going to be a better situation for Unforgiven and Reeker. But there's a lot of unknown. There are a lot of unknown things surrounding this team. In regards to where they place, I think that they definitely belong in the C tier at worst, and I think that they definitely have the upside of being in the B tier, competitive in playoffs. I do not expect them to reach domestic contender next split. So I would say they're definitely better than these LCS teams, but I don't really expect them to be competitive with the best teams from their region. Competitive in playoffs. Yeah, I feel okay about that for now. It might change. We'll see. Next up, we have Vitality. So Vitality had a very underwhelming performance. They did a little bit better in playoffs, but they had a lot of big draft issues in playoffs, and I think that's really the biggest concern that I have for them is that every split there are teams that I love the talent, and every time they draft, it makes me want to punch myself in the face. And that happens a lot with Vitality. And basically what that results in is the team needing to play the hyper-aggressive style that they shouldn't have to do that because they are more talented than a lot of the other teams that are in the region. Alfari, is he annoying to listen to a lot of the time? Is he kind of self-important and egotistical? It kind of seems that way. But is he very good at League of Legends? The answer is yes. Self-made. Very good jungler. I think that it's unfortunate that his teams have kind of been underperforming recently. But if you look at these drafts, unless it's proven to me that Self-made is the reason why they're drafting this way, I'm not going to blame Self-made for the difficult game states that they get themselves into. Perks, I think that Perks is still a very good mid laner. He had some very good performances during playoffs, and I think that he showed that he's still at that level. Carzzy really annoyed me in playoffs because he made it clear that he believes that Aphelios is better than Jinx, and you can prefer that side of the matchup because you like being the aggressive side, but the fact that you need to be aggressive on Aphelios and that your draft needs to also deal with the Jinx is just bad. It's bad coaching, and it might show that the players have too much influence on the drafts, which is concerning because all professional players have a lot of I'm sure most professional players have a lot of opinions on what a good draft is and what a bad draft is, what a good champion is, what a viable champion is, but they're wrong a lot of the time, and people will always want to say, oh well, you think you know better than them, and I really think that not only myself that I do, but a lot of other people out there watching multiple games in multiple regions for multiple years, we all see these games and we're more removed from the situation, which kind of gives us the opportunity to not get too emotionally invested into one team's playstyle. When you see all of these teams with slight differences drafting a certain way and in multiple regions, champions like Jinx having positive win rates, even in the Aphelios matchup, there's something that they're not taking into consideration or that their experience of those games is kind of distorting. And you can take the examples from traditional sports where there's a reason why the best football player of all time or the best baseball player of all time wasn't the best coach or general manager or the most insightful person about the game. A lot of the times there are other qualities that made them a very good player that don't necessarily translate to understanding the game. Like maybe they have really good intuition, but using applied intelligence or something just doesn't work for them, which is fine. So in terms of their ranking, I really do think that Vitality is a domestic contender, and they have the upside of being a Worlds contender, assuming everything breaks their way and that Perks plays even better in the summer split. It's really going to come down to drafts though. I'm concerned enough to say that the highest I can put them is the A tier. Going into the split, I had them as one of my top 3 teams in the West. I don't know if I still feel that way. In terms of talent, I do, but there are a lot of concerning things that we've seen from them so far this split. So I'm fine leaving him in the A tier for now. Next up, we have Excel. So Excel, Finn is a pretty good player. He's a league average at best kind of player. I think that there are matchups that he will try to be a carry player, and he did that in playoffs when he picked Mordekaiser, and then the players from Vitality started laughing at him, which was pretty funny. I think that Finn is good enough to be on this team. Marcoon played pretty well throughout the year. I know Nuke Duck had a good split for Nuke Duck, but Nuke Duck is not a player that you should want to be on your roster long term. if they think that keeping Nukeduck, is just to give the rest of the players experience, then fine. But don't kid yourself to think that this team has championship winning upside when your mid laner is Nukeduck. It's just they should change out Nukeduck for like an actual playmaking mid laner. And the reason they should do that is because they have Patrick and Mickey. So Mickey is a very good support. Everybody knows that. Patrick is a very good AD carry. Everybody knows that. But Patrick's playstyle is more passive in general, and that's not necessarily a problem. If you have a potentially variant top laner in Finn where you can kind of be more aggressive during the pick ban phase, look for blind picks and stuff like that, then you're often going to want Patrick to play either a late game carry or a utility AD carry. And that decision should be based off of what does their top lane champion pool look like, what does their jungle champion pool look like, and what does their mid lane champion pool look like. And if there are aggressive enough champions in those three roles where they can accelerate the timeline of the game, then you can justify Patrick playing these utility champions. And while he is taking on a lot of resources, he's not the one that's asked to carry the game. And then as time goes on, if the meta it gets pushed into a hyper carry position, the other players, it's easier for a mid laner to go from playing like a playmaking mid laner or like an aggressive mid laner, and then kind of taking it back a little bit and playing a control mage. That's an easier transition than AD carries. AD carries are roughly always the same mode of like, once I hit a certain power spike, I'm going ham, and it's like a 5 to 10 minute difference of when that aggression really kicks on, depending on the type of champion you play. So in terms of their ranking, where are they? There we go. I think that XL can be competitive in playoffs, but I don't think they can get to Vitality's level. XL had, by XL standards, XL had a good split. By Vitality standards, Vitality had a bad split. But when they met in the playoffs, Vitality still showed that they are the better team, the more talented team, and they didn't even play that well against XL specifically. I think that it was an okay performance, but it wasn't anything special from Vitality. Next up, let's talk about the MSI representative G2 Esports. This is kind of insane that G2 is being talked about that the way they are now. I made a video about MSI, and some guy was saying like Impact is better than Broken Blade, LOL. I don't see that kind of person. I would have loved to ask them that question a year or two ago when Broken Blade was in the LCS, because I guarantee you there's no way that person would have said Broken Blade is just as good as Impact, if not better than Impact. And that's what annoys me about a lot of the league scene, is that a lot of it is very reactionary. Even my takes about Evil Geniuses seem reactionary now because they just won a championship. But I've been saying this for months. It's not just like, oh, something happened recently and I'm going to fundamentally change my opinion. When things happen that reinforce my beliefs, I'm going to talk about it. When my beliefs about a player change, I'm going to talk about it. So Broken Blade, I think that there isn't anything we've seen recently that should make you fundamentally change your talent evaluation of Broken Blade. He's always been a pretty good top laner. I thought he was a pretty good top laner on TSM. And he's always been a pretty good top laner, but the peak of Impact has at least historically has been better than Broken Blade. Yes, there was a game that Broken Blade had a lot of kills on Ornn, but that's not really saying something. You don't even really want that to happen. So it did happen in that game, and Broken Blade was very influential in that game, and I think that Broken Blade's a good player overall, but I don't think he's better than Impact. So he is like a better version of Finn in my mind. I think that he's better than Armut. I think that he's better than a lot of the top laners in the league, and that's a good thing for Broken Blade, but it doesn't mean that he's a good top laner internationally. Jankos, I love Jankos. I think that his career has been great. His attitude and personality are great. I love watching him. I love listening to him. There's a lot to love about Jankos. He is not an elite jungler. If you have to say to yourself, he is an elite jungler for the LEC, you qualifying it by saying for the LEC kind of proves that he's not. He would not do well against most teams in the LPL, and it's like there are probably like 8 to 10 teams in the LPL that are legitimate. There are probably 4 teams in the LCK that are legitimate, 4 teams in the LCS that are legitimate, and then between like about 4 in the LEC, up to 6 in the LEC, but generally 4. And the same thing with the LCK. Like their 5th and 6th place teams can be pretty good at any one point in time. But in general, like if we're just talking about jungle talent rankings, I'm not going to have Jankos at the top of that list. He's had a great career. He does his job, and that's great. But he's not going to be a difference maker consistently at the international level. Caps, one of the best Western players of all time. He has shown the playmaking upside. He's willing to put the team on his back. Love Caps. And then the big question mark is Flockit and Targamas. And this is an interesting dilemma for me, because I think that they are most likely going to be better in the future meta because of their playstyle, but I don't think that their talent means that they will be able to repeat as the summer champions. I think that this was the best possible situation for them, their result in the spring. So this is the kind of team where I'm going to put them in the A tier, and I don't think that they're more talented than G2, or I don't think that they're more talented than Vitality. Their recent performance has been better, and if we get into a utility AD carry meta, it could potentially help G2 more than Vitality, because I think Targamas is the big wild card in this situation. If he pulls out things like Pyke again, that could be bolstered by the meta shift. And if champion diversity is important, that could be a big benefit for G2, more so than Vitality probably. So I think that they're a domestic contender. I don't think that G2 has the ability to go very far at Worlds because of the limitations of Jankos and because of the perceived limitations of Flockit and Targamas. But I understand how that could, be kind of nullified by the meta shift. So that's how it can go against what I'm saying right now, which the fact that I'm admitting that is a possibility kind of does speak to the potential of G2. Next up, we have Misfits. So Misfits had a great split by Misfits standards. Hyrit has proven that he is a good top laner. We knew that he was a good top laner even in 2020. We were consistently playing Misfits. They broke our hearts a lot of the time. In the jungle, we have Zlatan. Zlatan is a good jungler, but Zlatan is not a great jungler. He was over-reliant on Lee Sin. I called that out before their playoff match, before the playoff started, and I said, if I'm a coach for any of the teams in the LEC, I'm going to target ban Zlatan and then deal with everybody else. And teams consistently got rid of Lee Sin, and it worked against them very effectively. So hopefully he can take that as a learning experience and grow from that. But until we see that he has an improved champion pool, that's going to be a big problem for Misfits overall. Vetio, very good mid laner. I think that he has the upside of being one of the better mid laners for a couple of years now, meaning that moving into the future, he could be one of the top mid laners for multiple years. And then in the bot lane, Neon and Mursa. So this is the big problem with Misfits. Their drafting throughout the split was very consistent, and the other teams did not punish them for it. Neon was given his preferred champions all the time. Zlatan was given his preferred champions all the time. If a team wanted to attack them in drafts, they could even be thinking to themselves, oh, we got a good trade for a draft. We got an Aphelios and they got Jinx. But their win rate was so high with Jinx specifically. I think they had like a 70% win rate with Jinx, or maybe even higher. And they also were big beneficiaries of other teams throwing away large leads. And we've said it multiple times, you still have to be good enough to let the team throw it to you. And they were in that spot and they took advantage of it. But I think that we're going to see pretty big regression from Misfits because of Zlatan, because of Neon. So I would say that I probably want them in the B tier. I do think that they're better than XL because they have Vetio and XL has Nuke Duck. So let's move on from that. Next up, we have Fnatic. So Fnatic, we have Wonder, Razork, Humanoid, Upset, and Hylissang. Humanoid, huge liability. People want to say that Humanoid is a very good mid laner. He is not a very good mid laner. He is very overrated. His playstyle is emulated by multiple players all over the world, and it's a playstyle that is very effective. I don't have any problems with his playstyle, but I'm not going to say, oh, look at Humanoid, he's a very talented player. If you took out Humanoid and you swapped him with Niski, I think that you're getting like 80 to 85% of the effectiveness of Humanoid. That difference is, real to be sure, but at the same time, like the best case for Humanoid, the best version of Humanoid is somebody like Showmaker. Showmaker will play a lot of the same champions as Humanoid, and that's how you're supposed to play them, to the level that Showmaker plays them, not Humanoid. And the difference between those two players kind of highlights how Humanoid is not an elite player internationally. If you want to talk about it just in the LEC and say, oh, well, Humanoid is one of the 5 best mid laners, that's not really saying much. You have Larson. I think Larson is better. You have Vetio. I prefer Vetio. You have Caps. I prefer Caps. You have Perks. I prefer Perks. And the reason is because he is not good enough at the playstyle to overcome the limitations of that playstyle. Playing champions like TF, they are good. They feel good when they're successful in the early game, but you're putting huge restrictions on your draft and you're forcing other players on your team to carry. You're not going to carry as a TF. You're going to put your teammates in positions to carry, which is an admirable thing. But let's not sit here and say that he is an elite player when he just really isn't. If you want to say, oh, he's been better than Perks for a couple of years, he's better than Caps, he's better than Vetio, he has more international, like he has better international experiences recently, then like fine, I see the argument that you're trying to make, but I don't really care about that as much. I care more about the talent and the playstyle, not the result as often. And that, for a lot of you, that might sound strange, but when you're trying to be forward looking and seeing how this is going to play out over multiple months, multiple years, you need to have real talent evaluation and opinions about player talent. And that's one of the opinions that I have that's out of line with the market, which is, in my opinion, an advantage to me. And then we have Upset and Hylissang, one of the best bot lanes in the region, for sure. They're both very good players. Wonder is good enough to be on a domestic winner. Razork is probably good enough to be on a domestic winner. Humanoid is good enough to be on a domestic winner. Upset and Hylissang are good enough to be competitive internationally, probably. And it's kind of the same thing where Upset's playstyle is a little predictable and isn't as variant as some of the players that I prefer to Upset. But, if you put him on a very good Korean team or a very good Chinese team, I think that he has the mechanical ability to play it out the correct way and, not be a detriment to his team. So I think that Fnatic definitely belongs in the A tier. I think if I'm just comparing them straight up against Vitality, I would say Alphari against Wonder. I would still prefer to have Alphari. I think that Wonder might fit into more teams, but if I just want the ability to like win one game specifically, I'd probably prefer to have Alphari. And we're getting to the point where maybe that opinion has to change in general about Alphari, because he does seem to put some restrictions on his team in draft, in the sense that he needs to feel like he has a champion that he can carry the game on, which makes him play some like low EV matchups, like playing Camille into certain champions that you shouldn't necessarily play Camille into. And it's because of comfort and like his belief in himself. Razork against Selfmade, I prefer Selfmade. Humanoid against Perks, I prefer Perks. Upset and Hylissang against Karzi and Labrav, I definitely prefer Upset and Hylissang. So, it's really splitting hairs. I'm not trying to make some kind of statement by listing the teams this way, but that's just genuinely how I see the talent level. And once MSI is finished and they put the LEC the odds to win the LEC championship out, I'm probably going to look to bet Vitality because I think that Vitality will be undervalued. But they are very popular and the sportsbook knows that. And then last but not least, we have Rogue. So going into the split, my top two teams in the LEC were Vitality and Rogue. I still think that Vitality is one of the top teams in Europe. I'm not 100% sure what I think about their upside at Worlds. And I'm not sure like where I kind of want to place them in this tier. I think that I do like them more than G2. I do like them more than Fnatic. And I think I like them more than Vitality as well. Talent-wise, I think Vitality has more talent. But, in terms of team cohesion and what they've shown more recently, like this is the team that I would want to invest in long-term because of their recent performance. So Odoamne, good top laner. Not a great top laner in my opinion. I think that Wonder, Alfari, Broken Blade, Odoamne, Hyrit, they're all good top laners. Even Finn is borderline good top laner. Armut is borderline good top laner. But it's often dependent on draft, and I'm not going to go out of my mind for somebody who wins the side of a matchup when they should win it. Malrong definitely looks like either the first or second best jungler in the LEC, and he's definitely a top 3 or 4 jungler in the LCS and LEC combined. I do think that there are better players than Malrong, and we'll talk about that in the next portion of the video. Larson is a very good mid laner. He does have some kind of playstyle restrictions similar to Humanoid, but his champion pool doesn't warp drafts as much as Humanoid's does. It's easier to fit a player like Larson into a draft than it is to fit Humanoid into a draft. And Humanoid's lows look much lower than Larson. And then there's also the upside of like Larson can go out of his mind in certain games on like a champion like Lucian. I don't think that Humanoid has the mechanical ability to play Lucian at a very high level against a good team. So there's that. And then we have Comp and Trimby. I think that Comp is pretty good. I think that Trimby is pretty good. I know that there are a lot of people that watch my channel and like have a very high opinion of Trimby, and I am starting to move in that direction as well. So you have potentially very good jungler, very good mid laner, very good support, good enough AD carry, good enough top laner, and that's a good recipe for a team. I don't know if I love them competing against some of the best teams in the world. And let's just move into the next part and talk about bringing in the LCS teams into this. So recently we heard that Fudge will most likely be going to the top lane. I don't know what that means for Summit. I don't know if that means they're going to lane swap or if they're going to get rid of Summit, which seems like a mistake in my opinion. They must feel like it's not worth keeping Summit because they can get some money for him on the market and then kind of try to save face. Or maybe Summit's like, I came here to play for LS. LS isn't here. I'm out. Which I would totally understand. So it's tough to say what C9's upside can be if Summit is gone. I think that Fudge is a very good top laner. I think that Fudge is better than most of the top laners in the LEC, or he at least belongs in that group that I mentioned before, like Odoamne, Alfari, Wonder, Broken Blade, Hyrit. I think that he's in that same conversation in terms of skill. I do think he's better than Finn. In the jungle, we have Blabber. I think that Blabber is better than most of the junglers in the LEC. I think that he's better than Razork, better than Jankos, better than Zlatan. He's kind of a liability. A player like Elyoya, I think Blabber and Elyoya are pretty similar in terms of playstyle and talent. Which ultimately I do have a good talent grade for Elyoya. I just think that the public perception is that Elyoya is one of the best junglers in the world. where I think that that phrase means something, and he doesn't get to that level. So then the other solo lane, we're not sure who it's going to be. And then with Berserker, I think that Berserker has the upside of being like a top 80 carry in the world. And I think one of the top 80 carries in the world. And I think that's why T1 had him. And I think that's why Gumayusi said that he was somewhat threatened by Berserker's presence and that he was happy when he went to Cloud9, because that means he wasn't in T1's farm system anymore. So that's high praise from a player like Gumayusi. And for that reason, I think that without seeing who they bring into the mid lane, it'll probably end up being Jensen. So if we just assume that they get a league average support and then bring in Jensen, Fudge, Blabber, Jensen, Berserker, random support, I think that's a pretty good team. I think that team would be competitive, if not better than a lot of these teams in the LEC. And one thing that you'll notice when I go through this list is that I think that the LCS, I think that there are more strong teams in the LEC, but I think that the upper echelon teams, they're pretty close in terms of the LEC and the LCS. And I think that the LCS is actually stronger at the top than the LEC is right now. And I think that we'll see that at MSI. But let's move on. So next up we have 100 Thieves. I think that we have, Someday is a good top laner, belongs in the conversation with those players we were talking about previously. Closer, I think, is better than a lot of the junglers in the LEC as well. And I think that's one thing that the LCS has, they have 3 solid junglers, like very solid junglers. I think Blabber, and Spica, so 4. Spica, Blabber, Closer, and Inspired are all top-level Western junglers. They might not be as good as some of the Eastern junglers, but they are good for the Western junglers. And then a player like River is borderline. But I think that, Abadaga has proven that he can be a top-level mid laner. I think that if he stayed in the LEC and pumped out 1 or 2 good more splits, people would be thinking of him at the same level as Vetio. The way that 100 Thieves drafts around him doesn't put him in a position to shine, which has kind of hurt his public perception. But he's still a good player. And then FBI and Huhi, they're a good bot lane. I think that they're probably better than Flocket and Targamas. They're better than Neon and Mursa. They're better than Unforgiven and Kaiser. So they do belong in this tier as well. If C9 had Jensen, who would I prefer? I'd probably prefer C9. So that's what I'm basing this off of, is assuming that C9 gets Jensen or a Jensen level mid laner. That'd be interesting. Let's keep moving. Next up, we have Team Liquid. So Team Liquid was all out of sorts by the end of that finals. I think that Bwipo is a very good top laner. Bwipo is arguably the best top laner in the West, and I think that it's fair. I think that he is probably the best top laner in the West, and he deserves that distinction because he has been very good for multiple years, plays multiple styles, can do whatever the team needs him to do. So I think for that reason alone, I think out of these 3 top laners, he's the best. In the jungle, Santorin had a good year. He had a very good year for Santorin standards. People want to give him a lot of credit for what he accomplished during the split. I think as time goes on, we will realize that Santorin is somebody that will hold back Team Liquid from being competitive internationally. And I think that's the same for Bjergsen. I think that that mid-jungle duo is going to be a limiting factor for Team Liquid throughout the year. And that doesn't mean that Team Liquid can't be successful and get into the knockout stage at Worlds. It means that when they are in the knockout stages at Worlds and they're going up against mid-jungle duos that are better than them, it will be very apparent unless they draft incredibly well. So then you're kind of covering that up with a very good draft. And you could see Santorin, if it's a tank jungle meta where they're asked to engage and kind of just be where the team needs them to be, That's better for Santorin. If it's like Santorin needs to go out and carry games against Tarzan, you're probably not going to want Santorin. And then in the bot lane, we have Hansama and CoreJJ. And I think that Hansama and CoreJJ are a very good bot lane. I think that they're on the upset Hillsong level. It's just that they're different. They're two competing styles. Upset and Hillsong, I think, are the better scaling side. And then Hillsong is also probably a better flashy playmaker. And then we have CoreJJ, who's like a more traditional support that can do everything that you need a support to do, can play multiple styles at the highest level. And then Hansama is more of a utility AD carry than he is a true carry, at least the way that Team Liquid has been drafting around him. The good thing about Hansama is that when he is asked to be a true hard carry, he can do it, and he showed that during the Misfits run a couple of years ago. And if we get into a spot where like Draven is a viable pick, he's like a Draven one trick, where that's very punishing against utility AD carries, and sometimes against hyper carries. So there are a lot of spots where if Draven was a little bit stronger, or a champion with a similar playstyle to Draven that can be super punishing in lane and snowball very hard, if one of those champions kind of exists, that could kind of unleash the upside of a team like Team Liquid. And I do think that Team Liquid is probably better than G2. Yeah, better than G2. And then very close to these teams. And then this will all come down to like, what does the matchup look like? What champions are viable at that point in time? Which lanes are more important because of the supposed champion pools? But let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's address the elephant in the room. There's only one team not on this list so far, and it's the Evil Geniuses. And I know that there are some of you who have seen my videos before, and there are probably some of you who are seeing this video for the first time. And I think that Evil Geniuses belongs in a tier above the rest of these teams. And this is more of a future-looking statement. I think that Evil Geniuses can be a true Worlds contender, where we get into a semifinal situation where they're one of the 4 final teams at Worlds, and all it takes is a good matchup for them to get to finals, and then a good series, and they could be world champions. And that might seem kind of insane to you, but I think there's been a lot of kind of traction to this narrative that, we like to talk about veteran players and having experience and how that can be very beneficial to players at the international level. But when you take a look at the players who were the focal points of teams who have won world championships, there are a lot of 17, 18, 19-year-old players where domestically you might not be as comfortable because they don't have the multiple years of experience. But once they get to that world championship environment, they can unleash their upside and kind of show you things because of their aggressive nature. And that doesn't happen with every 17, 18, 19-year-old player. But for Evil Geniuses, those are the players that they have. Impact has proven that even though he's a much older player at this point, he can go toe-to-toe with most top laners. It is possible that he would become a liability at the World Championship, but I think that if it got to that point, they would be able to draft around it, and it would be accepting a lot of pressure from the enemy team drafts and putting him into the losing side of a lot of matchups. But that is the worst case scenario for Evil Geniuses. The best case scenario is that he continues to play both sides of these matchups very well and still have counter picks and pocket picks like the Mordekaiser. In the jungle, we have Inspired. And Inspired is the best jungler in the LEC and the LCS. That was my opinion. That was my opinion before their run in playoffs, and it's my opinion now. Before he left the LEC, he was the best jungler in the LEC. Before, that's just there's no debate about that, right? Some of you probably think that Elyoya is a better jungler for some reason, but he's not. There's not really much else for me to say. You either agree with me or you don't. I'm not going to be able to sit here and explain to you why a player who has accomplished more is the better player. Inspired has been the most important player on his team for multiple years. I know that Rogue has had a lot of success, and the only reason why they're able to continue that success right now is because they have Malrong, and Malrong is a Eastern jungler. It's not like they took him off of like a team in the LEC. He's a completely new player in this environment. And some of the people are probably going to come in here and just like look at the screen at the end and be like, oh man, this guy watches Evil Geniuses win one championship and now he thinks that they're the best. I've thought that Evil Geniuses were the best team in the West since the beginning of February. You can check my channel. I've already had this opinion. It's just things are playing out in my favor right now, so I'm going to take the opportunity to talk about it from this perspective. So then, yeah, Inspired's the best jungler in the West. There are some players who are very close, and that could, draft themselves into an advantageous position against Inspired. But if you gave me a choice of one jungler from the West, I would pick Inspired. In the mid lane, they have Jojo Pyun, and before the season started, I said if Jojo Pyun is not a professional top laner, then he will look very bad, he'll get exposed, they'll get rid of him, and they'll bring in somebody like Jensen, and they'll be much better because of it. The alternative is Jojo Pyun is good, and Jojo Pyun is good. He doesn't need to be the best right now. He needs to be good enough to let Inspired and Danny carry, and that's exactly what they're doing. Even though Jojo Pyun has a limited champion pool, you can see that in these drafts against Team Liquid was trying to take things like the LeBlanc away. They weren't necessarily afraid of the Rise in general. They did ban the Rise in a few games, I think. But like they were trying to pinch his champion pool, and he still did really well. He still has like the super easy champions that he can play, like Victor. So if you have LeBlanc, Rise, Victor, and you can pull out a TF, or you can pull out these other kind of champions that aren't his best champions, but he's able to play them, then it shows that he's good enough to compete and not be like a huge liability. Now, when he plays against a team like RNG or a team like T1, it's very possible that Jojo Pyun gets exposed, and I think that would be the best case scenario for Evil Geniuses. If EG makes a run, if EG makes it as far as they should in this competition, and they get to the semifinals or the finals, and then Jojo Pyun gets slapped around, they can walk away from the tournament saying, we were competitive, we played well, we drafted pretty well, the other team exposed a weakness in Jojo Pyun, let's work on that over the next couple of months, and then we'll get to Worlds, and we'll try to be even better at Worlds. And that's the mentality that Evil Geniuses need to have. And then last but not least, we have the bot lane, Danny and Vulcan. I think that Danny is amazing. Danny, in my opinion, is the best AD carry in the LCS. He is the best AD carry in the West. I really do think that he is the best player in the West. And people are already like kind of joking about it, saying, is Danny the best Western player, or the best player from the LCS? I think that it will be a tough conversation to have, for the same reason like the LeBron MJ stuff is really difficult, because there's a group of people who only look at accomplishments and accolades, and then there's the other group of people who are paying attention to the eye test and talent level and taking the context of their era into consideration. And I think that's the situation we're going to find ourselves in with Danny, because his willingness to put his team on the back and the mechanical level that he plays at is not seen in most of these other AD carries that are in the West. And frankly, in the world, I do think that Danny has the upside of being a top 5 AD carry in the world. That's within his range of outcomes. I genuinely believe that. Is he there now? Probably not. But if we get, through MSI and through this year and through Worlds, and Danny's consistently performing at a high level and cleans up his laning phase, just think about how much better he could even be. And that's without even mentioning Vulcan. Vulcan is one of the best supports in the West. I think that he's on the Hylissang, Trimby, Core JJ level. You either think that or you don't. Personally, I think that. So they have a top 4 support. They have a top 1 or 2 jungler. They have a top 2 to 3 max AD carry. And then they have a strong top laner and a good enough mid laner. And that's not giving Jojo Pyun the credit that he deserves, but that's where I'm willing to temper my expectations. If Jojo Pyun like hits his ceiling and becomes a problem next split or at Worlds, then like fine. But he's also 17 years old. He has the ability to grow and get better, and that's why you kind of want to have these younger players on your teams. So I know that people who watch my channel, they were probably expecting this because they know that I have a very high opinion of Evil Geniuses, and I just love Evil Geniuses. This shouldn't be taken as like none of the teams in the A tier can also be competitive at Worlds. If you told me that, you know, Rogue, Vitality, Fnatic, Team Liquid, one of those teams made a run at Worlds and like had an easy draw in the playoffs and like kind of snuck into a semifinal and then got slapped in the semifinal, I really wouldn't be that surprised. And there's always the chance that a player shows us something next split where they're dominant for one reason or another because a specific champion becomes very good. But in general, this is how I view these teams. I do think that you can jumble the teams in the A tier, you can jumble the teams in the C tier, but overall, these are the teams in a close approximation of the order. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. I do think that those 8 teams are the best teams in the West, the 8 best teams in the West, and I would expect, you know, all the titles to kind of go through those teams for the summer split. So that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for watching. If you disagree with me, please let me know in the comment section why you disagree with me and give me an actual reason, and I'll listen to you. I have discussions with people in the comments all the time about their opinion and my opinion, and I try to be civil about it, but sometimes these people aren't civil with me, and I can't be held accountable for their actions. So fight fire with fire. Again, that's all I have got for you today. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.